So our first session today is called The Global Impact of OTT. Today, China has approximately 738 million OTT subscribers, and India approximately 525 million. And we are a distant third at just under 300 million. But those numbers are consistently growing and at a greater rate. So in our first session here, we will discuss the approaches needed to sustain this growth and expand opportunities for content providers. Our first speaker today is Reza Rasool, who is the CTO of Real Networks. He has held many notable roles, a few of which were CTO of Kwai Oak, which is a CTO as a service business, and also CTO of Gather Films, where he developed a crowdsourced theatrical distribution. His presentation for us today is titled, What We Can Learn from China's Massive OTT Development. Reza.
Thank you, everybody. Thanks, John. Thanks for your kind introduction. Actually, many of you might know me from other positions that I've held. One was I was the founder of a company called Widevine Technologies that pioneered DRM for digital entertainment. And even when I look through the audience here, it's almost like looking at a core sample of my career. When I look at the faces, some people know me from when I was at Lightworks. I was head of software for Lightworks. I think we pioneered arguably the whole non-linear editing space. It's the gift that keeps giving, as I was saying to John Eisen. It won a technical Emmy Award just recently at NAB. Anyway, today I'd like to talk to you about my current position and what we're doing at Real Networks. The paper is titled Leading the Charge, What We Can Learn from China's Massive OTT Deployment. What has that got to do with Real Networks? Well, I'm going to give you an update on Real Networks in China. And I'm going to discuss the massive OTT growth, also the challenges in terms of regulatory complexity, and also the complexity of the infrastructure, and then talk about the opportunities that are there, and then how, if you're able to face up to the challenges, how you can benefit from those opportunities. The main takeaway is that I guess the company that invented streaming media still continues to innovate in digital technologies, and China is big and getting bigger. So 2 takeaways for you. Right, so a bit of a history lesson since we're talking about in nostalgic terms. I wonder if you can cast your mind back 2 decades to how you would go about watching television on the internet or even streaming audio. So you're probably hearing in your mind the sound of a 14.4 modem dialing up to the internet. Remember, that's how you had to do it. And I'm sure if you close your eyes, you can hear the sound of that modem. I don't have the audio clip for you, but in that era, Real Networks invented real audio and real video. The RTSP protocol was first submitted to IETF in 1996. So I guess it's more than old enough to drink by now. Real audio and real video were the codecs that made it possible for you to watch television over the internet, albeit very blocky and heavily compressed. But actually, if you went to watch TV on the internet, nothing was on. There was no content. And so as a company, we realized that it wasn't only sufficient to engineer the technology, but you actually had to engineer the entire ecosystem. And so Real Networks is also known for having brought about the first audio streaming platform. It was called Rhapsody then. It's called Napster now. Just a side note, it's the only profitable streaming music service in the entire landscape of offerings. Real Video was the codec that powered this streaming service, and we're up to version 11 of the codec. I'm going to talk about that more today. Fast forwarding today, Real Networks this year launched a platform called Cena. Cena is a new way of watching video in a more social way with commentary. Imagine Twitch for Netflix or Twitch for Hulu or OTT television. And then another product line that reports to me we've launched is called Safer, Secure Accurate Facial Recognition. It's a product line that emanates from our computer vision initiative, and it is powering a whole new product portfolio for Real Networks. So the main takeaway is the company that invented streaming media continues its innovation. But let's talk about China. Well, I needn't give another history lesson. Real Networks faced stiff competition in the West, especially here in the US, and that competition was deemed to be uncompetitive, and but in the areas where we didn't face competition, the product line thrived, and the Real player in particular, that business thrived. And it did so in China. We opened an office there in 2005 based on the strength of the brand in China. And by 2014, we'd clocked 1 billion codecs deployed into smart TVs, into set-top boxes, into mobile phones. The codec and that codec business from which we earn per device royalties in a very traditional manner is still thriving. The 11th version of the codec we call RMHD, Real Media HD. It was adopted by Huawei into the operating system of their mobile phones in 2015. It's now been adopted by CIBN, which is the OTT operator in China, and that's what I want to talk about further. But let's first step back and compare China to the rest of the world, or China to the US in terms of its size. As John mentioned, and these graphs might be a bit too, I think you should be able to read them. China's got a huge internet size, a huge internet penetration of their population. 750 million users have already, 750 million users have internet connection, broadband connection to the home, or high bandwidth connection to their mobile phones. And that leads the way. You can see in that graph on the top left. But it's interesting to also look at the top right, where you see that the usage in China is more mobile than in the rest of the world. And people tend to connect to the internet through a mobile device more than they do through a laptop or some other mechanism. And then the bottom two graphs is my attempt to try and line up the growth of the China internet penetration with that of the US penetration. The key dates, the date ranges to look at are 2007 to 2016 on the left for China, 2007 to 2016 on the right for the US. The reason I pick that out is because in that range, 2007 to date, the growth of internet penetration has plateaued in the US. And it plateaued at around about 75% penetration. In China, it's not only bigger, but it's still got headroom to grow. They've only penetrated to 50% of the market. So it's big and it's getting bigger. So great. China's OTT market is booming. Who are the players? The top three players, Tencent, iQIYI, and Youku. Youku is like the YouTube of China. And then Tencent is a brand we probably know. iQIYI is like a Netflix type of service. And you can see Youku showed steady growth, whereas the other two, which are offering movies and VOD services, as a Netflix would do, saw a massive growth, and then following a similar sort of a growth trend. So the three players we talked about, here it is by the numbers. Video is, let's see, iQIYI went public recently. Video is a large part of the Tencent business. You can see it's growing. iQIYI seems to be making massive inroads, but Tencent is the big giant with the majority of the, or the larger number of subscribers and paying subscribers. The challenges. It's almost a meme to say that China is heavily regulated and is under heavy government regulations. Those regulations and the regulatory bodies underwent a reshuffle, a consolidation, and also a splitting out. There was an entity called SAFT, and in April this year, I guess it dropped the F, and it's a SART, and there's a separate body that regulates film acquisition and content. So everybody needs a license. It's not a free and open market. You need a license to be a studio. You need a content creation license, and there's you apply for these licenses, and there are only so many licenses given out, and it's a very rigorous regime. You need a license to be a content aggregator as well, and the difference is the content aggregators also have another responsibility. They have a responsibility for certifying and monitoring the content that goes through their platform. So a company, let's say like Vubiquity, which is a content aggregator, is the content aggregators in China have more of a responsibility of not only monitoring, but they become a gateway through which content is served. And the onus is on them to ensure that the content served through those gateways all adhere to the certification guidelines. Only 7 such licenses were granted, and the company that I'm going to talk about, CIBN, is one of those licensees. Then, if you want to set up a streaming service like a Hulu or a Netflix, you'd need a streaming service license. 500 or so have been issued, 588. Turns out Real Networks in the early days applied for one and was granted such a network. It's very rare for a foreign company to be granted a license to operate a streaming service inside China. Real Networks has one. We used the license to be just a showcase for our technology and did not run it for a profit. Although we've now merged, we've created a joint venture with CIBN and will be running that for a profit. And so let me show it to you in terms of a diagram, and maybe the following diagram is actually more, it explains the landscape a bit more, and I hope you can see this. If you can't see it, if the resolution isn't high enough, you'll be able to download the decks and see it in more detail there. But here you can see the 7 aggregation platforms, and you can see that even every single streaming service has to run their service through one of these gateways. And Yoku, for instance, runs it through CIBN, and the CIBN, CNTV, GITV are all directly owned by the government, whereas the other entities are independent commercial operations, but still subject to regulation. So let's talk a bit about CIBN, because this is the company that Real Networks is partnered with. And CIBN has 15,000 titles, 19 carousels. Typical annual subscription would be about $50 for the year. But it's got a huge, it's got a reasonable size for the youth of this company. It's only a few years old. 110 million active devices, 32 million active subscribers. It has a sister company called Sparse China. And Sparse China, also a young company, is partly owned by CIBN, focuses on serving to the mobile audience. It has a massive audience. It's got 430 million registered users. Now that would largely be a Chinese diaspora, because Sparse China is the one with the exclusive license to restream CCTV. So they can, that's the way the Chinese diaspora would actually get their service, through mobile devices, and so hence this large number of 430 million. So why am I going on about these two companies? It's because they presented Real Networks with a technical problem, and we worked to provide a solution. I want to talk a bit about that solution. Here is the handshake there. You might recognize the founder of Real Networks, Rob Glazer. They're shaking hands with Mr. Gong, the CEO of China Radio International, which is the parent company of CIBN and Sparse China. And in the background are some key characters. The CTO of CRI is Mr. Wang, Mr. Kerr, and the GM of Sparse China. So why are these personalities so important? In China, to do business, it's a marketplace. It's not a marketplace for beginners. It's heavily dependent on relationships, and long-standing relationships, and connections. And so for a newcomer company to make inroads there is extremely difficult. We benefit from having been and having invested in China for over a decade. So what is it they wanted? Well, let's back up there. CIBN said, what we want is, we want to take the user experience of our OTT service up a level, but we want to do that while also reducing our CDN costs. We'd like to expand the coverage of our HD service to more users, and work together to create a new business model. So that was music to our ears. And here you can see the handshake on the agreement, and it included a joint setting up of a joint venture. But what did that really mean? And all OTTs want this sort of thing. They want to make video look better, but in order to do that, it requires more bandwidth, as we know, more processing requirements. They'd like the video to stream more smoothly, with reduced latency, maybe with better random access, smoother adaptive bitrate switching. Obviously, they want to reduce CDN costs. The CDN cost is the second highest bill, compared, obviously the highest being content acquisition. And then a more nebulous complaint that they had is they wanted to regain codec control. So what does that mean? Well, unmonitored or there's been a phenomenon of loss of control of the codec that has occurred for these operators. In the move from cable television to IPTV to OTT, the operator has lost control of the codec. What does that mean? In the OTT world, a consumer goes to their favorite electronic store, buys a set-top box. It could be a Fire Stick, it could be an HDMI dongle, it could be a PlayStation. They bring it home and they say, I'd like to watch Hulu on this. And so they would connect to the service on the internet. And it's only at that point that the service operator discovers the codec capabilities of the device. You'll recall in the old days of cable television or in days of IPTV, the operator owned the device, probably specified the device, and leased it, rented it to the subscriber. In that case, in the old days, the operator would specifically know the capabilities of the device. And now, in this modern era, we're having to discover that on the fly and then adapt the service. So, what does that mean? What does that mean? It means that you can't necessarily switch to a particular codec, the latest codec on the market. Like, okay, we want to all switch to HEVC. When CIBN probed their network, they found 72 different devices on their network. Only 32% of them had HEVC decode capability. That meant that they could not make a binary switch to a modern codec because they'd have to still maintain the workflow for H.264 as well as an HEVC codec. So what was needed? We proposed a software codec. So this seems like a crazy idea. If it was achievable, a software codec could actually be deployed by the operator. We would give it to them in the form of an SDK over which they could wrap their OTT app. And so on connection of the device to the service operator would then deploy their OTT app, which includes in software the codec. Great if it's possible. Okay, so I want to talk about how we've done that. Real networks, it's in its DNA was this ability to optimize and create technologies for real-world solutions, as we did in the days of the 14.4 modem. And so we challenged our codec engineers to do exactly that. And we offer it in the form of an SDK for OTT set-top boxes for mobile phones and smart TVs. And then the encoder tools we give away for free. So let me introduce the Real Media Codec, RMHD. It's a software-defined codec for a software-defined network. It's the best balance of quality and efficiency. Outperforms 265, outperforms VP9, supports higher resolutions. Battery consumption. On mobile phones, it does consume battery, but not a whole lot. Compared with a 264 codec, it's about 8 to 11% more battery consumption. So Moore's law wins out in the end. If you're banking on software, you now are riding the curve of processors doubling in performance each year, and it just makes your solution a whole lot better. Contrast that with investing, let's say, $10 to $20 million in making a chip version of the codec. When does that pay off, and when is it obsolete, and when is that solution outrun by software running on a modern processor? So we get greater device coverage. Let me show you the numbers. Here's how we perform against AVC and HEVC. Sorry, the graph does look a bit... You're seeing the curves, though. Okay, the blue curve is my curve. Okay, the blue curve is RMHD. The orange curve is HEVC, and the yellow curve is AVC. So it's not difficult to outperform AVC. We, in fact, when we compared to CIBN's 720p service that they were delivering with AVC, they were taking up 2.5 megabits, and they wanted us to promote the service up to 1080p at the same quality as their previous service, but reduce the bandwidth. So we did that at 1.5 megabits. And so that's what this graph shows. I would say that, you know, the VMAF on the y-axis, which is the quality axis, I would say pretty much that RMHD and HEVC for 1080p video are toe-to-toe. There might be a slight advantage, but really the eye can't see the difference of more than 3 or less than 3 points of VMAF. So I think we are pretty much toe-to-toe. But with 4K, there's a market difference, market improvement. So we show a 60% advantage over AVC when you look at a service running at a VMAF of 88, which is what Netflix operates at. And then we show an improvement over HEVC of about 25%. Why does RMHD do so well? And why does it improve at 4K? It's because in the codec we made some key choices. One is we decided to only look at motion between adjacent frames, and that massively reduced the complexity of the codec compared to the MPEG class of codecs. And we chose to double down on spatial compression, and we just are way more aggressive on spatial compression. This maps onto the trend in video formats. You know, when we go from standard definition to 720p, 1080p to 4K, the spatial resolution's increasing, but for most commercial services, the frame rate's not increasing. So we didn't feel that, we thought there was still room for further compression on the spatial side and change the balance compared to the MPEG approach, and spent more computation on spatial compression rather than temporal compression. So we don't only offer the codec. Real Networks is known for streaming. And so some of that ancient wisdom that's still in the company from 20 years ago that built the buffering logic that was very session-based, that lived on the server side, that became obsolete when streaming moved to client-based streaming, to the likes of HLS and MPEG-Dash. We chose to try and resurrect some of that ancient wisdom and apply that to a low latency HLS solution. And we end up with a solution now that offers a faster startup, faster seek time, lower latency, and is CDN friendly. And we can do that because our chunk sizes are much smaller. We have a much lower motion vector reference. In the MPEG class of codecs, you will have references that could go up to 32 frames from the current frame. And so what does that do? That means you end up with a codec that's more streamable, but it actually takes up a smaller memory footprint. Its multi-threading is less complex, and the overall implementation is less complex. So the company that brought you streaming media is still innovating, but the success of a proprietary format as this is requires not only codec engineering, it requires ecosystem engineering. Thank you very much.
Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please tap the like button and also subscribe to our channel to receive notifications when we add new content. For more information about us, please visit SMPTE.org. We'll see you next time.